Now let me tonight lay out some of the other great issues where our new Reform Party stands apart from both Beltway parties. Last year, at the end of Bill Clinton's Balkan War, I was given a small party by some Serb Americans who wanted to say thanks for my having opposed that war. And they told me of a woman who wanted to be there that night, but she wasn't coming out because both her parents had been killed in the bombing of Belgrade. Mr. Bush says his only objection to Mr. Clinton's war was that it was not fought ferociously enough. I wonder if he could send that message to that lady, that Serb woman who lost her mom and dad. Now, why did we do this? Why did we bomb this little country for 78 days when it had never threatened or attacked the United States of America? Yes, there was an ugly guerrilla war going on in Kosovo where troops of the KLA, guerrillas, were engaging in terrorist attack on Serb soldiers and Serb police, and there were ugly and nasty reprisals. But in the 1 year, there had only been 2,000 dead in this entire war. And as wars go around the world, that wasn't even in the top 10 or the top 20. Yet look at the disaster we wrought. After Clinton launched his war, thousands died. The Albanians were driven out of their homes, 1 million of them. Now 250,000 Serbs have been ethnically cleansed in KLA counterterror. Serbia is smashed. Kosovo destroyed. Russia has been driven into the arms of China, and American troops are tied down in the Balkan Peninsula. It has nothing to do with the vital national interests of the United States. My friends, I count myself a patriot. I love this country. But what in God's name are we doing? Milosevic is a thug and a tyrant, but that is not his country we destroyed. That is their country. And the Serb people have always been friends of the United States. Saddam Hussein is another wicked tyrant who has launched aggressive war and murdered his own people. But who has killed more innocent Iraqis? Saddam Hussein or UN sanctions? When Madeleine Albright was told on a television show, that a UN study had found that perhaps 500,000 Iraqi children may have died because of our 10 years of sanctions, she responded, quote, "We believe it was worth it." Worth it. When did the greatest republic on earth start waging war on children? After Mr. Clinton launched one of his drive-by shootings with cruise missiles to get the latest scandal off the front pages, Mrs. Albright said, Miss Albright justified it this way, quote, "If we have to use force, it is because we are America. We are the indispensable nation. We stand tall. We see farther into the future." Talk about the arrogance of power. George III could not have said it better. Friends, I am ashamed to say it, but we have begun to behave, they have in Washington, like the haughty British Empire our founding fathers rose up against and threw out of this country. This then is what our party, our cause, and our campaign are all about. We are Americans who stay with our founding fathers.
That pretty well says it all.
That was an excerpt from the Long Beach Convention. Dennis was there, and isn't it interesting that the same thing that was happening several years ago is happening now?
Well, basically, I would also like to go over another part of our platform that talks about, we keep the military industrial complex keeps feeding these third world countries, bombs and everything else, and perpetuates this, and the Reform Party has actually put something together against this. It says substantial penalties, civil and or criminal, must be imposed upon any corporation or government entity, to include those personally responsible found to jeopardize national security as a result of technology transfer or other actions. More or less what I'm saying by this is that today's good guy that we give all the weapons to and all the wonderful things that they love to sell them may be the guy that we have to take out because he's gorged with power through some of our own weapons. What do you say to that, Ray?
I think if you all are fans of Alex Jones, he's pointed out on several occasions that during the Iranian Iraqi war, that many of the chemical weapons were actually given to Saddam by us.
Yes, we have to be very careful. That's why, today's topic was on foreign policy. We have to be very careful who we give our technology to, and it's very vital that we do this because, like today's friend can be tomorrow's boogeyman. So we need to reevaluate our foreign policy completely.
A lot of people don't realize that the invasion of Iraq produced, I would say it was a neutralization of some of our weapon systems. Back in 1973, there was a book written on the Yom Kippur War, and the author was in Israeli intelligence, and he wrote that Sadat, after the Six-Day War, tape recorded just about every brag session that the Israelis would put out concerning the tactics and weapon systems used. Now, I'm sure, as an old intelligence analyst myself, I was tactical intelligence. My schooling was from Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and an Army base there. That's the big training center down there. I'm sure from my experience that I just have a feeling that the nations of the world like China and Russia and many others have tape recorded every brag session, every news bit about our tactics and weapon systems. And you know what they're going to do with that. They're going to try to negate those weapon systems with lasers and heaven knows what else. But we did this in the name of overthrowing a third world country that didn't have a navy, they didn't have an air force. They were basically a bunch of irregulars with a broken down system that had been in battle for 10 years. So we've given away many secrets, many strategic secrets to potential foreign powers that will use it against our weapon system in the future.
Well, I mean, sometime this insanity has to end, and we have to have a more balanced foreign policy, where we do not actively engage or look for instances, where, through mutual cooperation among nations, if there are rogue nations, that we act accordingly, and that war is not the total answer, and the transfer of our technology to other nations that are irresponsible is not the answer either, and that we have to somehow maintain our own nation as a sovereign nation that takes care of the benefits of our own people, and quit going off in these wild adventures. It reminds me, Ray, a lot, if you study history, like going back into the Crusades. You remember that? How they would...
We have civilization over there that's 5,000 years old. They've overthrown, tossed out, I don't know how many foreign powers that invaded them since Alexander the Great, and Iraq is still there, and in fact they brag about it. This too will pass. But where does this stop? I guess Richard Armitage had something on the internet. He's the Deputy Secretary of State. Now he's turning the heat up on Syria. He's saying that Syria will pay for not attacking Israel's enemies. So what happens if President Bush wins again? Of course, we're not Republican and we're not Democrat, but I just fear that maybe the policies might be the same. But if they attack Syria, it'll be just a continuation of this hysteria that hopefully won't last 100 years.
Did you know that you can actually create more terrorists where there weren't any before, simply by this continual military intervention into other countries? We actually create more enemies and more boogeymen, and it's actually self-defeating in a lot of cases. Don't you agree with that, Ray?
Well, Pat Buchanan said that in several of his speeches. I think he said that at Long Beach, or was it Bob Jones University, that where does it end? You're going to create more enemies. That seems to be the gist of it. But what happens? I'm kind of curious about. Let's say that George Bush is reelected. There's already rumors about the draft. Of course, they've camouflaged it into a special draft. They're saying that they need special technicians and all. But the way the government works is I guess they like to cover what they're ultimately after. So I think that Americans aren't ready to go back into the draft system. Of course, you have the draft, you have a different political climate being created, and there's going to be a lot of opposition to that. And if he's reelected again, will he indeed go into Syria? Will he indeed go into Iran? Now, Iran is supposed to have some nukes. And a lot of people don't realize that the weapons of mass destruction are in Israel. Israel has many nuclear weapons. They've had them for years. In fact, I read a book one time where I think the Israelis have had the bomb ever since Golda Meir. And that's been, back to 1973.